Chris, I'm glad you remembered Caleb in your prayers. I meant to announce him in our announcements, but I must have missed that. I see he's traveling. I ran across a couple interesting articles. I'm going to paraphrase. This was today out of Fox News. It didn't list an author, so I don't know who wrote this, but some observations. Christianity is making a comeback in Europe, and it's most thanks to Muslims, says experts in Islam and faith leaders. A soaring number of Muslims, many of them refugees from Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan, are converting to Christianity, breathing new life into Europe's once floundering Christian churches. As many parts of Europe are becoming more secular, and houses of worship are seeing congregants leave in droves, it is Muslim converts who are reviving struggling Christian churches. European churches have struggled for decades to share the gospel with modern secular Europeans, says Matthew Kaming, a professor at the Fuller Theological Seminary in Seattle. They have found Muslim immigrants to be much more open to the message of Christianity. Europeans are wealthy, comfortable, healthy, and powerful, Kaming said. In short, they don't think they need God. But he added, Muslim immigrants are quite the opposite. Germany received over 900,000 asylum seekers in 2016. The majority were from Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan, according to published reports. Churches in Berlin and Hamburg were faced with so many asylum seekers wanting to convert that they held baptisms in municipal swimming pools. In recent years, asylum seekers, either alone or as a family, have increasingly turned to the Christian faith and asked church communities whether they could be baptized. In Austria, the Catholic Church received some 300 applications for adult baptism in the first 3 months of 2016. Nearly 3/4 of those are refugees from Islam. And that's according to a Fox News report as of today. Charles Morris, he's a secular journalist who turned Christian. He wrote a book called Fleeing ISIS, Finding Jesus, and he read this week in the New York Times article about the end of Christianity in the Middle East. So he wanted to go investigate, and he went to Mosul, M-O-S-U-L. You guys have heard a lot about Mosul on the news. It's a hot spot for ISIS terrorism. By the way, that is, we know Mosul as Nineveh in the Bible. It's where Jonah goes and does his mission work there. Anyway, this is where Charles Morris went to do his research for this book. He interviewed over 100 Christians who were former Muslims. Some were former imam khatibs. That's a leader in, like a preacher for Islam. They run a synagogue, or not a synagogue, a mosque rather. And so he interviewed some of these, and they said that many were having dreams and visions of Jesus. Morris wondered about this, why so many, and he kept hearing this over and over again. I think this is really interesting. He kept hearing over and over that these Muslims, coming from different parts, were having the same dream about Jesus. And he wondered why this was the case, why the Holy Spirit might have been manifesting himself this way in this part of the world. And as he thought about this and he talked to these Muslim leaders, he realized the reason was pretty obvious. Is because in that part of the world, they don't have Bibles. Now think about that. How are you going to learn about Jesus if there's no one there to tell you and you don't have the Bible? And God found a way to implant. And once these Muslims had these dreams, they found a way to get a Bible. And once they read the Bible, they were converted to Christianity. The former imams reported to Morris that there have been more Muslim converts to Christianity in the past 10 years than in the last 1,400 years of Islam. And thousands of them report that they came to the knowledge of Jesus through dreams. So we hear things like this, and I don't know if any of you have read that book. I would recommend it. It's really something to read in these parts of the world where Christianity, we think, has been stamped out. God is finding a way in. And so we hear stories like this, and we can recognize that the Holy Spirit is moving in very big and undeniable ways. But I wonder if we recognize that same movement is happening right here. I believe it's important to see this because I believe that it's one of the strongest affirmations that God is working and He is alive and He is active within the church today. I believe that He is participating in our lives. And sometimes He does that in a very noticeable way. I think He's showing us His love and speaking to us in very real and tangible ways. And so the question is whether or not we actually recognize that for what it is. Do we understand actually what's happening? I think as a whole, and I'm speaking in very broad general terms here, I think as a whole, the Church of Christ, broad spectrum, has a tendency to kind of push down or suppress this idea of the Holy Spirit. And this is one of the Godheads. We need to recognize the fact that, yes, God the Father, and yes, we recognize God the Son, but within conservative Christianity, we have a real touchy kind of, almost like visceral reaction when we talk about the Holy Spirit. And I think the reason for that is we're afraid that when we start talking about the Holy Spirit, we're going to enter into this denominational way of thinking. And I don't think that that's the case, at least not here. I think that is something worth talking about. I think it's something worth recognizing, that the Holy Spirit is active and alive in our church, brothers and sisters, whether or not you want to admit that or not. And I'm not suggesting we do anything out of bounds or anything like that. Do not understand what I'm trying to say here. I'm thinking that we do need to understand and recognize that, because for me it's a great affirmation of the Spirit working within the Lord's church, moving us forward. Okay? Let me give you an example of something that happened. And you might say, oh, Craig, that's just coincidence. I'll argue with you about that. I don't think it is. So we arrived in the Dominican Republic, and this was Friday, and then we traveled to Rio San Juan, from Santiago to Rio San Juan. We got into Rio San Juan, and on Saturday night, I did a devotional with our group. And I had no idea what I was going to talk about as far as this devotional. But on our journey from Santiago to Rio San Juan, it's a beautiful drive across this mountainous region. And I was the last one on the bus, and so I got stuck on this weird seat that's not actually a seat. And I was forced to look out this window kind of off to the side. And as we're driving through, all of the scenery, the lush green vegetation is right outside my window. And you all understand that when you're driving a car and you look at the things that are close by, it's just a blur. You can't focus in on any one thing. And so when I got to Rio San Juan and I thought about that trip and how I was wanting to focus on these beautiful flowers and vegetation right there, I couldn't, because we were driving the bus too fast and it was all blurry. And it occurred to me that what I needed to talk about was the fact that we need as a group to slow down and appreciate each day that God has given us. To appreciate the people that come into our lives. To take time and to talk about our faith. Slow down and appreciate the moment. That's what I talked about. We woke up, that was late Saturday night. We woke up early Sunday morning, and they do their church service in the afternoon. So Sunday morning, we went through an orientation type process where Chad Minette, he's one of the executive directors with MANA, talked to us about the culture and about some different things. And then his talk shifted, and he really began talking about the thrust of what he wanted us to know that day. Chad and I had not talked at all. We had not said anything about, any type of collusion that took place. We didn't sit down and say, okay, I'm going to talk about this in my Devo, and why don't you hammer this home? But do you want to know what he talked about? Saturday morning, he talked about the exact same thing that I had just talked about with our group Saturday night. Almost word for word. And so I called his attention to that. I said, Chad, this is really interesting because out of all the thousands of things that I could have talked about, you talked about exactly what I talked about. And he said, that is interesting. And no more was said about it. So we go to church later on that afternoon. Another executive director was speaking in church. Do you want to know what he talked about? The exact same thing. And Chad, the other executive director, looked at me, and he got up after this other man was done talking and started speaking in Spanish. And I didn't know what he was saying. But then he looked at our group and he said, I had to tell the preacher and the rest of this group in Spanish what had happened, because he said exactly what I said and you said exactly what I said. And let me tell you something. The Holy Spirit is working, trying to let somebody know, or more than one somebody, that we need to slow down. That message was loud and clear. Coincidence? I don't think it was. I think when you have something that obvious taking place over and over again, in almost the exact same words, there's something much larger taking place within the Lord's church. You guys see this, and as a matter of fact, the elephant in the room, David has mentioned it on more than one occasion, how when I'll lead singing and the things that he has talked about perfectly mesh up. David and I do not talk about, I can count on one hand the times that he's called me up on a Saturday night or Friday and said, hey Craig, do you mind leading this song? He has stopped doing that because he says that when he doesn't tell me, the songs that I decide to sing match up a lot better than anything he could think about. Coincidence? Maybe if it happened one or two times, it happens almost every Sunday. I think we as a congregation of Christians, it's not bad to recognize and give credit that the Holy Spirit works in ways that maybe we don't always understand. But if you keep passing these things off as, that's just coincidence, I think you really minimize a very powerful thing that is working within the Lord's church, and that is the Holy Spirit. In 1 Thessalonians 5:9, we're told not to quench the Spirit. I go back to this verse a lot, and I pray that I don't do that. And I think as a body of Christians, we need to recognize the power that the Holy Spirit does have. I'm not going to start speaking a different language in front of anybody. That's not going to happen. I don't think that it manifests itself in those type of miraculous ways that we see recorded in the Corinthian letters. But I do think that as a whole, we have a tendency maybe to push that aside and not recognize things that we do need to recognize and give credit where credit is due. And for me, it's an enormous boost in my faith to realize that the maker of the universe is here alive, working in us in very noticeable, active ways. And I hope you feel the same way about that. So, kind of summarizing all of this and thinking about moving too fast in our life. Are we moving too fast to realize the Holy Spirit is active and working in your individual life and then as a whole, the body of Christians here? I've seen some really amazing things occurring over the last couple of years within this body of Christians. And I hope you recognize that God is very interested in what this body of Christians is doing, And I think that He has allowed His Holy Spirit to manifest itself in ways in this congregation that, at least in my estimation, is a really great and awesome thing. So if you're moving too fast and you're not recognizing that and you're not paying attention to maybe some things that are right in front of your face, slow down. Slow down and take a look. Pray for God to continue outpouring His Holy Spirit upon this body of Christians. If you do that, and I believe very fervently that if we do that as a whole, we're going to continue to see really amazing things happening here at Central. The invitation song has been announced. If there's something that we can do for you as a brother or sister in Christ, if you need the prayers of this church, or maybe you just never responded to the gospel and you know you need to get baptized, we can do that tonight. Would you come as we stand and sing?